Have you ever wondered what it truly means to rot forever, to breathe, to think, to feel your flesh decay, yet never die? There are warriors in the galaxy who no longer remember what sunlight feels like. Who no longer remember warmth, or the sound of laughter, or the comfort of their own heartbeat. They march not as men, but as relics of a betrayal that time itself refuses to forget. They are called the Death Guard, the Plague Marines of Nurgle, and their curse is as infinite as the stars themselves. Once, they were noble sons of Mortarion, warriors of purpose, fighting for a father they believed would free them from tyranny and fear. They stood proud among the legions of the Emperor, draped in the green and bone of honor. Their hearts beat with defiance, not disease. But that was before the rot, before the creeping death that now defines their very souls. Imagine the silence of space, broken only by the rattling breath of a warrior whose lungs no longer function, yet who still draws air out of habit. Imagine armor fused with flesh, oozing, dripping, breathing. Imagine knowing that you cannot die, that your body will heal, no matter how much it festers. That every wound becomes a mouth, every scar a reminder that the decay within is alive. That is the existence of the Death Guard, cursed to walk forever, spreading the gifts of their God while being devoured by them. And at the heart of it all stands one figure, Mortarion, their primarch, their father, their betrayer, and their savior. A being who once sought to free humanity from death and disease, only to become the very embodiment of both. This is not just a tale of corruption. It is the story of a promise broken by the universe itself, a promise of freedom that became servitude, of loyalty that became infection. The Death Guard were not born monsters. They were made slowly, painfully, inevitably, until mercy itself became meaningless. In the endless rot of the warp, they have found immortality. But it is not the kind of eternity anyone would wish for. Because for the Death Guard, the war never ends. The pain never fades. And the stench of their existence, the odor of a million corpses walking in unison, is the only prayer they have left. So ask yourself, what does it mean to live forever, when even your soul is decaying? Have you ever wondered what kind of world could give birth to warriors who no longer fear death? A place so poisonous, so cruel, that even the air itself tries to kill you. Stay with me till the end of this video, because by the time you understand where the Death Guard truly came from, you'll see why their curse was never a choice, it was destiny. Barbarous. A world smothered in endless fog, its skies choking with chemical death. Imagine a place where the sun is nothing more than a memory, hidden behind layers of toxic clouds that drip acid rain for centuries. The ground there isn't soil, it's rot. The rivers are poison. And above it all, high in the mountains, ruled beings who were not human, but something far worse, the warlords of death. These towering creatures were the lords of Barbarous, shrouded in armor that fused with their flesh, feeding on fear and decay. They enslaved the remnants of humanity that somehow managed to survive below, forcing them to live in constant terror. The air they breathed killed them slowly, the food they ate was tainted, and the night was a silent executioner. Yet, among the dying, one child survived what no one else could, a child that would one day be called Mortarion. He grew up in the shadow of the greatest warlord of them all, a being so vile, so powerful, that even the toxins of the world bent around him like a loyal pet. That warlord found the infant Mortarion among the corpses of a dead village and took him as a trophy. The child grew beneath the clouded skies of Barbarous, breathing poison as naturally as others breathe air, trained by death itself to become its heir. But even as he grew stronger, taller, and more deadly, Mortarion's heart never belonged to the monster who raised him. He could feel something calling beneath the fog, something human. The screams of the villages below haunted him, their suffering echoing through his nightmares. He began to descend from the mountains, further than his kind ever dared, searching for the truth behind that pull in his soul. And when he found them, the humans struggling to survive in the valleys, he saw what real strength looked like. Not in armor, not in corruption, but in their will to live despite the agony. He joined them. He fought for them. He became their protector. And for the first time in his cursed world, hope began to spread. Mortarion became a symbol, the reaper who stood against his own kind, the one who would cut through the fog of death to free the living. But destiny, as it often does in the grim darkness of the far future, had other plans. Because the skies of Barbarus would one day burn with light, not from the poisonous sun that had long been lost, but from the arrival of a being who called himself Father. The Emperor of mankind had come, and with him, a promise that would both save and damn Mortarion forever. Have you ever felt the sting of betrayal wrapped in the illusion of salvation? When the thing you've longed for all your life finally arrives, only to remind you that freedom often comes with chains. Mortarion felt that the day the Emperor descended upon Barbarus. From the poisoned mist above the peaks, a golden light tore through the sky, radiant, pure, and unlike anything Mortarion had ever seen. For a world drowned in decay, the light was almost painful. The Emperor came not as a conqueror, but as a god descending among the dead. His voice carried like thunder through the fog, his presence burning through the toxins that had ruled the world for ages. The humans below fell to their knees, weeping as the air cleared for the first time in living memory. They thought their deliverance had come. They thought they were saved. But Mortarion, the Reaper of Barbarus, did not kneel. To him, this was not salvation. It was invasion. He had fought and bled to free his people from the tyranny of the warlords, and now here stood another figure cloaked in light, claiming the same authority. Mortarion saw in the Emperor not a father, but a rival, another being who thought himself above men. Yet there was something in the Emperor's eyes that froze him, a quiet sorrow, an ancient knowing. He looked upon Mortarion not as a monster, but as a son. The Emperor offered him a place among his primarchs, a brotherhood of demigods born from his own design, scattered across the galaxy by fate. He promised Mortarion a purpose beyond the poisoned skies of Barbarus. To bring unity. To end tyranny forever. Mortarion accepted, but not out of faith. He accepted because he wanted strength. The strength to kill the last of the warlords, his own adoptive father. The creature who had taught him to breathe death. Armed with the weapons of the Imperium, and driven by a rage that burned deeper than any toxin, Mortarion led his people up the mountains once again. The battle was beyond brutal. The air turned black with vaporized poison, corpses dissolving in seconds, armor melting from bone. Mortarion struck down warlord after warlord, his army carving a path through centuries of decay until only one remained. But at the final gate, where the air was thick enough to kill a man in a single breath, Mortarion faltered. The poison, the very essence of Barbarus, filled his lungs, gnawing at his flesh. His vision dimmed. His strength failed. He fell to his knees. And that's when the golden light returned. The Emperor appeared above the fog, his aura cleansing the death that consumed everything. With effortless power, he struck down the last warlord, ending the nightmare forever. The humans were saved, and the Emperor had proven his might. But in that victory, Mortarion felt only rage. Because it was his fight to finish. His vengeance to claim. And his father, the one who had raised him in death, was slain not by his blade, but by the hands of the man who would now claim him as a son. That day, Barbarus was freed. But Mortarion's heart was shackled. He had gained a father, a legion, and a destiny, but in his soul, a shadow had already begun to spread. A bitterness that would one day rot everything he touched. The seed of the Death Guard's curse had been planted, and no light, not even the Emperor's, could stop what would come next. Have you ever tried to follow someone you didn't truly believe in? To serve a cause that promised glory but felt hollow in your soul? That's what it meant to be one of Mortarion's sons in the early days of the Great Crusade. When the Emperor claimed Mortarion, he also gave him command of his own legion, the 14 Legion of the Adeptus Asteroutes. Genetically engineered warriors built in the image of their primarch, they were meant to be unstoppable, tireless, immune to weakness and fear. The Emperor called them the Dusk Raiders, but under Mortarion's hand, they would become something darker, something enduring beyond death itself. They would become the Death Guard. Their discipline was absolute. Their endurance legendary. They didn't move like other legions, no shouts, no fury, no theatrics. They advanced in grim silence, through radiation, gas, plague, and fire, their armor stained the color of decay. Where others faltered, they thrived. Where others suffocated, they endured. They were forged in the poison of Barbarus, and no battlefield could match the horrors of their birth world. Mortarion led them not as a father, but as a warden. He demanded resilience, not loyalty, obedience, not love. He despised weakness in every form, especially in those who sought comfort or faith. The Emperor's light felt to him like another poison, another form of control dressed in purity. So Mortarion built his legion in his own image, relentless, distrustful of gods, worshipping only endurance. Yet despite his coldness, his warriors revered him. They followed him into hells that would have broken any other army. Planets steeped in radiation, ruins drenched in plague, toxic storms that melted tanks, these were their proving grounds. The Death Guard never retreated, never hesitated, never begged for mercy. They became the Emperor's silent reapers, feared across the stars. But deep inside, Mortarion's hatred for his father still burned. He could not forgive the Emperor for taking from him the one victory that had defined his existence. Every time he looked at that golden figure, that being of impossible light, he saw the memory of his own failure reflected back. So he fought harder. He pushed his legion further. And with every victory, the bitterness within him grew stronger. His brothers, the other primarchs, noticed it. Some pitied him, others feared him. The sons of the Emperor were demigods, each embodying a part of their father's vision. But Mortarion? He embodied death, and death does not kneel easily. He would never say it aloud, but in the silent moments between battles, Mortarion began to question whether the Emperor was truly a liberator, or just another tyrant dressed in light. And somewhere, beyond the veil of the warp, a whisper began to answer that doubt. A voice ancient, patient, and grotesquely kind, one that promised him freedom from the lies of purity. A god who would not demand worship, only acceptance. Nurgle had begun to take notice. Have you ever heard a whisper in the dark, soft, patient, and almost kind, the kind of voice that doesn't command, but understands you? That's how it began for Mortarion. Not as a scream. Not as a temptation. But as a comfort. At first, he thought it was exhaustion. Years of endless warfare had weighed heavily upon him and his legion. The Great Crusade never stopped, the Emperor's will demanded constant expansion, endless cleansing, and no rest. The Death Guard had become the perfect instruments of attrition, grinding down every enemy, one toxic battlefield at a time. But inside, Mortarion was decaying. Not physically, yet. Spiritually. He began to sense something in the rotten energy that clung to worlds tainted by plague and death. It was familiar. It reminded him of Barbarus. Of the poisonous mists and the stench of life clinging to decay. He didn't understand it, but he felt calm there. As if the corruption spoke his language. That's when the whispers started. They didn't speak in words at first. They came as sensations, a soft pulse in the fog, a rhythm in the decay, a warmth beneath the stench. Then, slowly, they became clearer. A voice, ancient and gentle, calling him child. It did not lie to him. It did not promise victory. It simply understood his hatred. It shared in his disgust for hypocrisy, for false purity, for the Emperor's radiant tyranny. Why do you still serve the light that scorns you? It asked. Mortarion never answered. Not aloud. But the seed had been planted. He began to despise the clean worlds they liberated, the shining cities restored under imperial rule. To him, they felt false, sterile, unnatural. Life, he thought, was meant to endure struggle, to adapt, to survive through rot and pain, not be shielded from it. His philosophy twisted. To him, the emperor's perfection was no longer admirable, it was oppressive. And his warriors, they began to change too. They felt their primarch's bitterness as their own. Some whispered among themselves, questioning the emperor's divinity. Others dreamed of freedom, a legion unshackled by golden chains. Still, Mortarion pressed on, his resentment buried beneath duty. He fought alongside his brothers, still wearing the emperor's colors, still obeying orders even as his heart turned darker with every campaign. Until the day he met Horus again. The War Master, first among the Primarchs, favored son of the Emperor, spoke to Mortarion with a voice that echoed something deeper. He talked not of conquest, but of truth. Of betrayal. Of a father who had lied to them all. And in Horus's rebellion, Mortarion saw something terrifyingly familiar, the same defiance that once drove him to free Barbarous. The same hatred of control that still festered in his soul. And though Mortarion did not yet realize it, the voice in the rot smiled that day. Because every word Horus spoke, every seed of doubt he planted, every promise of liberation, it all led Mortarion closer to the one truth that awaited him. That death was not his curse. It was his destiny. Have you ever believed you were doing the right thing only to realize too late that the ground beneath you was already rotting? That every step forward was sinking you deeper into something you could never escape? That's exactly what began to happen to Mortarion and his sons. The Great Crusade had started to fracture. Horus, once the shining example of the Emperor's will, had begun to whisper treason among his brothers. His rebellion was not yet open, not yet bloody, but it was spreading like a sickness, quiet, contagious, and inevitable. Mortarion, ever the skeptic, listened. He hated deceit, but he hated the Emperor's self-righteous control even more. Horus spoke to that resentment, feeding it with half-truths that sounded like revelation. He spoke of freedom, of casting off the false god who ruled from Terra. He painted the Emperor not as a father, but as a jailer who had chained his sons with lies. And Mortarion, who had lived his entire life under one tyrant or another, began to see sense in the War Master's words. To his legion, the Death Guard, it seemed like evolution. They had always marched through filth and flame, they had always fought in the places no one else dared to go. To them, rebellion was not betrayal. It was survival. And so the whispers spread among the ranks, even before the banners of open war were raised. Yet something else was spreading with them. The Death Guard began to change. Slowly. Subtly. Their resilience grew unnaturally strong. Their armor became harder to clean, caked in grime that never seemed to fade. The smell of rust and decay lingered in their ships long after battles ended. Some even said the fog of Barbarous seemed to follow them, seeping into the hulls of their warships like a living thing. Mortarion noticed. He felt it in his bones. Something unseen was watching them, nurturing them. But he did not stop it. Maybe he didn't want to. When Horus finally revealed his rebellion, when he declared war upon the Emperor, Mortarion did not hesitate. He joined his brother, his voice low and cold as he swore his allegiance. Not to chaos, not yet, but to the idea of tearing down the false god who had stolen his victory, his pride, and his freedom. And so, the Death Guard turned their guns upon the Imperium. At first, they fought with the same discipline, the same methodical perfection that had once made them legends. But the farther they marched into the shadow of treachery, the more the change became visible. They did not know it, but they were already being claimed. In the void between stars, their ships began to groan with strange sounds. Rust crept across metal like mold. Food stores spoiled overnight. Air filters clogged with black dust. And through it all, a voice began to whisper, again fainter now, but ever present, reminding Mortarion that decay is not death. It is transformation. And as the Death Guard waded deeper into rebellion, they had no idea that they were no longer fighting for freedom. They were marching toward their damnation. Have you ever felt trapped in a storm that never ends, a darkness so heavy it crushes every breath, every thought, every hope you once had. That's what awaited the Death Guard when they took to the void during the Horus Heresy. What began as a march to glory became a voyage into eternal decay. After swearing allegiance to Horus, Mortarion led his legion aboard their fleet, bound for Terra. Their purpose was clear, to aid the War Master in overthrowing the Emperor once and for all. Their faith in their cause was absolute, cold, unwavering, and grim. The Death Guard did not shout war cries. They advanced like a storm of inevitability. But in the warp, there are storms that no mortal, not even a demigod, can control. When the fleet entered the Imperium, the sea of madness that connects all worlds, something went wrong. The Astronomicon, the Emperor's psychic beacon, vanished from their sight. The warp twisted around them like a living thing. Time lost meaning. Days became weeks, weeks became months. Soon, they realized the terrible truth: they were lost. The warp had them. The Death Guard's ships drifted through tides of unreality, assaulted by invisible forces. Hulls corroded from within. The air grew thick and foul. Supplies spoiled, and food turned to sludge. Men began to cough up blood. The first to fall grew pale and feverish, their flesh blistering beneath their armor. No cure worked. No medicine could help. Then it spread. One by one, the proud warriors of the Death Guard succumbed. Their skin blackened. Their armor fused with their decaying bodies. Their screams echoed through the corridors like wind through a graveyard. The stench of rot filled every deck. Even Mortarion, the Reaper of Barbarous, was not spared. He watched helplessly as his sons, the very warriors who had survived poison, plague, and radiation, were now devoured by a sickness born from the warp itself. And through it all, he felt that familiar whisper, the same voice that had comforted him years ago. It spoke gently this time. No threats. No commands. Only understanding. Do you see, child? Even now, your strength fails you. Even now, the gift of endurance you built from your suffering is being tested. You sought to conquer death, but death cannot be conquered. It can only be accepted. Mortarion tried to resist. He ordered his fleet to purge every infected, to burn the sick, to sterilize the ships. But it was too late. The plague was not physical anymore, it was spiritual. It had already entered their souls. For the first time in his existence, Mortarion knelt. He fell to the deck of his flagship, gasping for air that his lungs could no longer take in. His vision blurred, his body bloated, his organs liquefied. He could feel his legion dying with him, thousands of warriors rotting alive, their agony echoing through the warp. And when the moment came when death should have finally taken him, the voice returned one last time. Do not fear the rot, my son. It is not your end, it is your beginning. And in that instant, the darkness split open. From it, a figure emerged, immense, grotesque, and smiling. Surrounded by swarms of flies and rivers of filth, the plague god Nurgle reached out his hand. And in Mortarion's last breath as a mortal being, he accepted it. The warp screamed. The ships burst with life, a foul, unstoppable, eternal life. Flesh grew over steel. Rust became muscle. Disease became strength. The Death Guard were reborn, not as mortals, but as the living embodiments of plague. The plague fleet had been born, and their curse would never end. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be reborn, not in light or hope, but in rot, filth, and agony, and to love it? That is what happened to Mortarion and his sons when they surrendered to the voice in the dark. Their salvation didn't come in the form of mercy. It came as decay that would never end. When Mortarion opened his eyes again, the world was unrecognizable. His ship, once a proud vessel of the Imperium, had become a living nightmare. The walls pulsed like diseased flesh, leaking pus and bile. The air was thick with flies the size of a man's fist. The crew that once cried in terror now laughed through ruptured throats, their agony twisted into joy. And Mortarion, he felt alive. The pain was gone, replaced by a warmth that burned through his body like fevered sunlight. His lungs no longer failed him, they no longer needed to. His armor was fused with his skin, his scythe pulsing like a living organ. The decay that had once terrified him was now his essence. Then, the voice spoke again. "Welcome, my child," it whispered, echoing through the rotting halls. "You have done what few ever could. You have embraced the truth that life and death are one. That decay is but another form of creation." Before him appeared a colossal figure, its form both grotesque and gentle. Nurgle, the Lord of Decay. The god of plague, despair, and resilience. His laughter was like the gurgling of 1,000 diseased throats, yet it carried an affection Mortarion had never felt, not from his warlord father, not from the emperor, not from any brother. "I give you my garden," Nurgle said, "and I give you my children. You shall spread my gifts, not as punishment, but as blessing. For in rot, all things are made equal." Mortarion wanted to reject him, to scream, to deny. But there was no denying what he had become. His soul was already bound to the plague god, his legion already transformed into instruments of pestilence. Every warrior aboard the fleet had been reshaped, their bodies swollen, their armor corroded, their laughter echoing through the warp. The Death Guard were no longer men. They were plague marines. And Mortarion, he had become a daemon primarch, a demigod of pestilence. His wings, ragged and tattered, stretched wide across the corrupted sky of Nurgle's realm. His eyes burned with the dull green fire of decay, and his scythe, silence, sang with the laughter of a billion flies. From that moment, Mortarion no longer served Horus. He no longer served rebellion. He served only decay, the endless cycle of death and rebirth that Nurgle had promised him. And in that service, he found something terrifyingly pure. Peace. Not the peace of rest or victory, but the peace of inevitability. The acceptance that all things, empires, heroes, gods, would one day rot. And so, he led his legion once again into the galaxy, not as conquerors, but as carriers of the Grandfather's gifts. Every world they touched withered. Every city they entered bloated and died. Planets became diseased shrines to their god, where even the soil screamed with life. The Imperium, horrified, realized that the Death Guard had not fallen, they had evolved. And at the center of it all, Mortarion watched his father's empire decay from afar, whispering the truth he had learned in the warp. Everything dies, but not everything ends. Have you ever seen the face of something that should not exist? A thing that once was human, once noble, now returned to the world as a monument of rot. That's what the galaxy witnessed when the Death Guard returned from the warp. It had been decades, though time in the warp has no meaning. For the Imperium, the Death Guard were presumed lost, another fleet swallowed by madness. But when the void finally tore open and their ships emerged, what came forth was not a legion. It was a plague. The Plague Fleet, once proud vessels of war, now looked like carcasses drifting through space. Their hulls bled rust and pus, and clouds of insects filled the void around them. The calm channels carried only coughing, laughter, and hymns to Grandfather Nurgle. Entire Imperial sectors watched in horror as these ghost ships drifted toward them, bringing not battle but infection. The first planet to fall was Macarion's Reach. Its skies turned green as the Death Guard made planetfall. Civilians and soldiers alike choked on invisible spores that bloomed across the atmosphere. Within hours, flesh softened, metal corroded, and even the dead refused to stay still. The Death Guard walked through the chaos calmly, their every breath spreading new life forms, their laughter echoing like the tolling of bells. To them, this was worship. And at their head was Mortarion, now a towering, winged specter of decay. His armor wept pus, his scythe glowed with sickly light, and every step he took left the ground crawling with new horrors. The very air around him shimmered with plague energies, distorting reality itself. His voice was no longer mortal. When he spoke, the wind itself carried his words. The Emperor sought purity, Mortarion declared to the dying world. But purity is a lie. Only decay is eternal. Only the rot endures. There was no battle that day. The Imperium's armies broke before the Death Guard even reached them. Their bullets melted, their armor failed, and their bodies dissolved into living filth. Within days, Mortarion's reach was gone, transformed into a festering garden of life and death intertwined. From that day on, the galaxy would never again speak of the Death Guard as lost. They had become myth. A warning whispered to children of the Imperium, the Rot Father's sons who walk the stars, carrying diseases that can kill a world and sanctify it in the same breath. And yet, in all his glory, Mortarion still remembered. He still saw the mountains of Barbarus in his dreams. The fog. The screams. The child staring into the sky, hoping for salvation. And every time he looked toward Terra, he remembered the moment that light had robbed him of his vengeance. He told himself he had accepted decay. That he was at peace. But deep in the rotting remains of his soul, the same hatred still festered, the hatred for the golden figure who once called him son. And that hatred would drive him again. Because even among the plague god's blessings, Mortarion could never forget what was taken from him. And one day, he would return to claim it. Have you ever wondered what it means to live forever, not as a gift, but as a punishment? The Death Guard don't age, they don't die, and they don't heal. They decay eternally. Every second, their bodies rot a little more, their organs liquefy, their armor corrodes, but they never truly fall apart. That's the curse of Nurgle's love. Inside their plague-ridden ships, silence doesn't exist. There's always the sound of breathing, coughing, wet laughter, and the constant squelch of corrupted flesh moving beneath armor. The walls themselves pulse, like veins of some diseased beast. To the Death Guard, this is home. But to any sane creature, it is hell incarnate. Each warrior bears his own mark of blessing. Some leak bile through their helmets, others have tongues that move on their own, whispering prayers even as their masters sleep. Some have no eyes left, yet see through clouds of flies that hover around them. They don't fear pain. They don't even remember what clean air feels like. And yet, they still remember who they were. Hidden deep within their decayed minds, fragments of humanity linger like ghosts. They remember the brothers they lost during the heresy. They remember the taste of clean water, the sight of sunlight, the pride of serving the Emperor. Those memories haunt them not because they miss them, but because they can never have them again. Mortarion too suffers the same curse. Despite his immense power, despite his title as the Daemon Primarch of Nurgle, he feels no joy in his victory. His every breath carries the stench of decay, his every step spreads the infection of his god, but his soul is bound, chained in servitude to the very force he once despised. He had sought freedom from the Emperor's rule only to find himself enslaved to something far worse. And yet, Nurgle's laughter is endless. In his realm, Mortarion's suffering is amusement. To Nurgle, decay is not an end, it's a celebration. Life and death are one, and all things eventually belong to him. So while the galaxy trembles before the plague fleets, while worlds die coughing in their shadow, the Death Guard march on forever, trapped between death and immortality. Their loyalty is their damnation. Their devotion is their disease. And in the heart of their endless rot, one truth remains. They are not free. They will never be free. For the curse of the Death Guard is not simply to decay. It is to endure that decay for all eternity, to watch themselves die forever, but never reach the peace of death. Have you ever wondered if damnation can become destiny? If a curse can grow so deep that it defines everything you are? That is the truth of the Death Guard, the sons of decay, the keepers of rot, the cursed children of Mortarion. Millennia have passed since the Horus heresy. Empires have risen and fallen. Stars have died and been reborn. But the Death Guard remain unchanging, eternal, and unrelenting. They do not fight for victory anymore. They fight for purpose, for identity, for the only thing they have left, their corruption. Across the galaxy, their name is whispered like a disease. Planets quarantine entire sectors when a plague fleet is sighted. Imperial worlds burn their crops and drown their own to stop the spread. But it never matters. You cannot stop rot. You can only delay it. And in the warp, Nurgle laughs his garden blooming with new horrors every day, each one birthed from the Death Guard's blessings. The grandfather of plagues adores his children. He whispers to them in dreams, promising joy, purpose, and love. But behind every promise lies a chain. And Mortarion, his greatest champion, knows this better than anyone. Because despite everything, the power, the immortality, the glory, Mortarion still stands alone. Sometimes, when the pestilent winds fall silent, and the hum of infection stills, he stares into the void. He sees the distant light of Terra, the golden planet he once tried to destroy. And for a brief, fleeting moment, he remembers the mountains of Barbarus, the cold air, the chains of his father, and the hope of a boy who only wanted to be free. That boy is gone now. Replaced by the Lord of Death. But deep inside that corpse of a god, something human still stirs, something that will never forgive what the galaxy made of him. And so, the Death Guard march on. Not as conquerors. Not as saviors. But as symbols of what happens when purity meets despair, when faith turns to rot, and when a dream of freedom becomes a nightmare of eternal bondage. Their curse is endless. Their decay eternal. And yet, in their own twisted way, they have found peace in knowing that one day, when the stars themselves rot away and the galaxy crumbles into dust, their laughter will still echo. Their plague will still bloom. And the name Death Guard will still be whispered as the final truth of a dying universe. Because in the end, nothing is eternal. Except decay. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.